Stay tuned now for Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome to Westchester Eye on the Radio, our weekly discussion of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. I'm John Sharan, along with Ardina Seward, our third member of our Troika. Peter Moses is AWL again, but for legitimate business reasons today, and we'll have him back next week. And Ardina, we have an in-studio guest this week, so why don't you introduce him?
Yes, we have Fred Polvere, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Fred, Polvre. Fred is, first of all, a climber, and he is has been a long-time grassroots advocate for climbers and climbers' access to different venues. But today, we are going to talk politics because Fred also is a former political columnist for the Westchester Guardian newspaper. And he has written extensively about politics and also is still actively writing about politics in Yonkers. And today's discussion is going to be about the Yonkers Assembly race. And it looks at this point that we are down to two candidates, and I'm going to let Fred talk about breaking news, which happened, I think, Fred, within the last.
This just today on Facebook.
Okay,
Anthony Nicodimo's campaign manager posted that he's withdrawing from the Democratic primary. He did not have enough valid signatures on his petitions. So, no, it's not clear whether he's still running for a third-party line yet.
Well, it looks like I would say if he didn't have enough valid signatures, he's out and gone. So I think that puts us down now to two candidates, Nader Sayegh and Joe Pinion.
Correct.
And you wrote a rather, I want to say acidic essay about Sayegh in the Yonkers Tribune, which is authored by Hezi. So tell us a little bit about Sayegh and your opinion.
Okay. First of all, I was at the Indivisible meeting in June 10th, where all the candidates spoke. And every candidate who got up and spoke, some elected and some candidates not elected yet, all of them spoke about their passions, what they were striving for, civil rights, human rights, equal rights, whatever. And they all spoke passionately about it. When Sayegh got up, he told his life story. He did not say anything about what he stood for or what he was passionate about. It was such a disconnect to the audience, who all the people there were active in politics and trying to be active to get certain things done, and he did not at all address their concerns, our concerns.
But I mean, to play devil's advocate, some would argue, well, you know something, he's a lawyer by trade, and he talks facts.
Doctor counselor.
A doctor counselor. Well, we'll discuss the doctor down the road. But he is, I guess, by trade, he is a fact-based person, as opposed to somebody who evokes passion and drama, as a lot of politicians do.
Absolutely correct. But he did not give anyone there a sense of what he stood for. There was no there. In fact, one of the points I would make is that he was the co-founder of the Westchester Independence Party, and that's what the Westchester Independence Party does. They're there for patronage. They're not there for any issue.
Explain
Can I go into that?
Yeah, explain
Please
that.
do.
Okay, so in Westchester Magazine in 2008...
Now, understand we may have a break here, so you may have to continue it on the other side of the break. So,
Okay.
But go ahead.
So Lawrence Lanahan wrote a column in which he quoted Phil Reisman, who called the chair of the Westchester County
Just focus on the mic.
Independence Party the most powerful man in Westchester. And people don't know that quite often they switch their endorsement according to how much money they get from each candidate or each party. In 2007, Nader Sayegh ran for the Independence Party line against Phil Amicone for mayor of Yonkers. And Cavallo and Ciampoli of the Independence Party challenged his petitions. When they went to court, the judge ruled and said that Sayegh had committed fraud on his petitions.
And on that, you're going to have to hold a break here, because you're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Duran, along with Ardina Seward and our special in-studio guest, Fred Polvere, climber extraordinaire and political columnist, formerly with the Westchester Guardian, and someone who's written a very interesting comment in the Yonkers Tribune. We're talking about the situation of local politics in Yonkers, and we'll be back after a brief Fox News break and a brief Fox Business break, so stay tuned.
And now with Fox News commentary, here's Fox News Radio's Todd Starn, America's quintessential community station, and it's all your damn fault. 1460 WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Duran, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Here we are again, folks. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I am Ardina Seward with John Duran. We are minus Peter today, but he will be back next week. And our in-studio guest is Fred Polvere. And prior to the break, we were talking about the F word. And I don't mean the F word in a bad sense. I mean, it is a bad sense. When
yes, but it's a word that can be said without the FCC complaining.
Exactly. It's the F word in terms of fraud. And there were some allegations of fraud, I believe, involving Nader Sayegh in 2008. Fred, am I correct?
This was the 2007 race.
2007.
And he wanted to run against Phil Amicone for mayor of Yonkers and get the independence line. And so in this article by Lawrence Lanahan, Westchester Magazine, Lanahan quoted the judge who said it's clear that Sayegh had committed fraud on the petitions. Now, that's all I know about it. I don't know more than that. But I think he doesn't do the work himself. I think that's a problem with Sayegh. As you could see from the $50 million shortfall Yonkers had in the Board of Education while he was the president, and if you read my column, when he was questioned on that by someone who worked on it, his answer was, well, we found it, which I don't think you would accept as an answer from anyone you hired.
Absolutely not.
To protect your interests, whether it's your security of your house, your assets, and they're missing, and the person says to you, well, I found it. That's a non-answer. And
again, I would like to discuss that further. I mean, I know it sounds a little naive, but this revelation happened just months prior to the budget issue. I mean, the budget was already being discussed, and this happened. We're not talking about a year. We're talking about months before the budget, and it threw everything into a total tailspin to the point of bringing people to the brink of layoffs. So if you're an administrator with a school system, how is it that you don't find this until the last minute? I mean, who's minding the store?
Well, I can't explain the inexplicable. I'm sorry to say.
And going forward, who is responsible then for minding the store and fighting this error long before we get to a budget crisis?
Assuming that you're the president of the Board of Education and you're doing your job, you and your board members should be overseeing everything. And obviously, it wasn't done correctly.
Okay.
I will say that there is so much opaqueness in Yonkers. And I'm going to diverge a little bit. David Simon, who wrote The Wire, the TV series.
Sure.
He also wrote Show Me a Hero and created The Wire, which I think is probably the best thing ever put on television. I hate to say this, better than Brideshead Revisited.
It's in the top 10 for sure.
He said, he was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun, and he said, when your local newspapers don't cover your city council meetings, your county board meetings, democracy dies, corruption thrives.
Absolutely.
And he's absolutely right. And that's happening here. When I moved to Yonkers 30 years ago, the Journal News, which it was called, covered city council meetings. They don't anymore.
Yeah, they don't have the budget.
And it's happening all across the country. So I'm expanding this. As long as we don't have coverage, stuff like this is going to happen, not just in Yonkers, but everywhere across this country.
And unfortunately, we're stuck there because too many people feel, oh, I get all the news I need for free on the internet. Nobody wants to pay for a newspaper. And newspapers have fixed costs as they have to do to pay salaries, to print newspapers. I mean, Peter and I were involved in the newspapers in the past, and we understand this. And it's sad because you see things like what's happening with the Daily News. They just let go of half their staff 2 weeks ago, and they've released some others over the weekend. And certainly that paper is incapable of doing what it once did. I mean, and you just don't see where this spiral is going to stop until somebody's going to be able to plow some more money into this, because, sad to say, money now is necessary to make sure that our lawmakers and our government representatives are held accountable.
Absolutely. And I subscribe to 3 newspapers, and I think I get good news because of that. Free news.
You get what you pay for.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to pay for. Just at Low HUD, I know someone who works there, and she went from 1 beat to 5 beats. And you know what that means. That means you can't do any of those beats justice.
Not to mention the fact that she probably has 1/5 the space that she used to have for each of those, so that basically she has to treat it the way, I mean, I was on loan for USA Today for a while, and people ask me how it was. I say it was terrible, and they say, why? And my answer is because if they asked me to tell the story of war and peace, this is what would be expected. There was a bloody civil war in Russia. Many people died. It was very cold. That would be it. And while it's absolutely a very broad outline for the book, it certainly has no meat on those bones.
I can't top that. So let's get back to fusion voting. Is that all right?
One of the things that I want to talk about, Sayegh has said that Yonkers schools are doing well. And as of, I believe it was 2015, 2016, there were 3 failing schools in Yonkers. Yonkers has a graduation rate of 82%, which is 6 points below the national average, which is 88%. But you're still talking about 20% of the kids do not graduate from school. So it's a huge gap to fill. Not one person can do all. But, I mean, I don't think that it's fair to the public that there is this veil of excellence as far as the Yonkers public school system is concerned. So
can I segue into the funding of the Yonkers schools?
Yeah.
So I think I've mentioned to you, if your child goes to school in Great Neck, your child gets more money from the state than a student in Yonkers. And this has occurred because Republicans control the state Senate. And my state senator for 18 or 20 years was Nick Spano, who was the 3rd most powerful man in New York State. And it didn't change because he voted with the upstate Republicans and the Long Island Republicans.
And you're going to have to hold your thought right there, Fred, because we have to take another break. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan, along with Ardina Seward and our special in-studio guest, Fred Polvere, a climber and also a political columnist, formerly with the Westchester Guardian and recently with some work with the Yonkers Tribune. We're talking about Yonkers politics right now, and there seem to be some problems there, but we're going to get to the bottom of it right after this.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio. I'm John Sharan along with Ardina Seward and our special in-studio guest, Fred Polvere. And Fred is a political columnist, a keen observer of politics. And Fred, we had a recent Supreme Court ruling which basically impacted what unions could spend their money on in terms of requiring people to make donations to the union that could be then spent on political candidates. How do you think that's going to impact politics as we know it?
Okay, so the decision wasn't how they spend their political money.
Okay.
The decision was to people who work in a certain field, whether it's teachers or a state education, a state union, government union, have to pay union dues.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Janus decision, which rejected, I think it was a 46-year-old unanimous decision, just the opposite, said they did because the union was representing everyone in terms of doing bargaining for salary, collective bargaining,
safety,
protecting
it was the
their
First
rights,
Amendment issue,
everything.
yeah.
And now the Supreme Court said this is violating the free speech
It was a First Amendment issue. Yeah.
of certain people who don't want to be in the union.
Mm-hmm.
And most unions, though, do separate their dues from their political action. So the question I have is, are union members going to stop paying dues? I hope not, because if we lose unions, we have no balance against corporations.
right?
And so we'll see what happens. I do not think it's going to have an immediate effect, but by 2020, it may.
Now, we were talking about Nader Sayegh in Yonkers. Tell us a little bit about your views and opinions of his opponent, Joe Pinion.
Okay, so Joe is very articulate, very well spoken, very presentable, but very opaque. He's been on shows and he's written stuff, and he says he's a small business owner, but he never says what the small business is. He basically has implied that he took over his mother's business and then says he started himself. But I can't comment much on it because I don't know. I do know that now he's working for a Republican consulting firm, and that is in no way a small business. He co-wrote an op-ed with, help me with this, Bob Inglis, is that his name? The former
English, yeah.
Inglis,
Yeah.
the former South Carolina congressman, who's now working for Young Republicans, and they both wrote an op-ed saying that New York State Republicans are leading the way in environmental protection. Now, I don't think any Republican who follows the news would agree that that's true. And I think that a lot of stuff that Joe Pinion says is like that, where he, again, my opinion is that as long as the state Senate remains in Republican hands or has Democrats who are going to side with them, Yonkers and New York City will never get their fair share of funding for education.
But do you think that Joe is part of a new phenomena that we're seeing of younger people who've sort of become subcontext of their party, such as the young lady in Queens who won Ocasio, and also Pinion, who is a Republican, but he is, for lack of a better word, a kind of progressive Republican, as Ocasio is to the Democrats.
I think progressive Republican is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
I can't see. I don't see any progressive Republicans. We had on the national level, we have Jeff Flake, who was the #1 deficit hawk in the Senate. Didn't want to give children food, poor children food, unless it was there was a corresponding cut somewhere else in the fair. Yet he wrote for a massive tax cut that is benefiting the wealthiest people in this country. In fact, it's so little has come down to ordinary people. The Republicans are not even running on the tax cut. Think about that. They passed this massive tax cut. They crowed about it, and they're not running on it because people are saying, so I can buy an extra soda, an extra hamburger a week. And that's what the tax cut is meant for them. And yet Trump bragged last week how much money he saved the Cokes when he trashed them, bashed them, and then admitted his tax cut benefited them. So where are the progressive Republicans? I don't see them. And I do not think Joe Pinion is a progressive Republican. I think he is not being honest in a different way. I think you can't be honest if you're a Republican right now. And you can see it with so many of the neoconservatives who have all of a sudden saying what's happened to the Republican Party. Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post. Bill Kristol saying minorities and young people have to change the government. Bill Kristol, think about that.
But does that but going back to the phrase of what's happened to the Republican Party, does that not mean that something is happening to the Republican Party in that the definition of being a Republican has changed?
No, I think what's happened is what we've seen is what the Republican Party stands for has been exposed. 1, tax cuts for the rich. 2, cut all regulations, as many regulations as you can for corporations. And 3, make it harder for ordinary people to sue when they've been hurt. As far as race issues, Richard Nixon started in his second term. Ronald Reagan announced his candidacy for president in Philadelphia, Mississippi, which is where the murders occurred of the civil rights workers. It's been there sub rosa, maybe a little bit more than that all the time. Trump has exposed it. So I don't see the Republican Party as a national party anymore, except for the news media that's almost like state-run news.
What does a Sayegh win mean to Yonkers? What would a Sayegh win mean to Yonkers?
Actually, I don't know what either win would mean for Yonkers. I am going to vote for if there's a third-party candidate.
I was going to say, from your discussion of both candidates, it sounds like your preferred candidate is other.
Right, it is other. And if there is, which there may not be, a third-party candidate, I'm going to vote for the third-party candidate. I'm a Democratic district leader. I did not carry petitions for Sayegh. I did not carry petitions for Nicodemo or anyone. I carried for Shelley Mayer, and I carried for myself as a district leader. I did not carry for Sayegh. He was in the Independence Party a year ago. He said that. And in my viewpoint, the Independence Party is a patronage party. So can I get back to the fusion voting?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So my wife said, I have to explain this very carefully. You go into the election booth, or you get your paper, and you're voting for a state senator. And you look and you see the candidates are Richard Blaine and Ilse Lund. And Richard Blaine has the Republican line, the conservative line, the reform line, and the independence line. Ilse Lund has the Democratic line, the working families line, and the women's equality line. So there's 7 parties, but only 2 candidates. In the whole country, there are only 8 states that allow that, but only New York has it like this in every single race. Only one, where you go in and you'll have 7 different election choices, different positions, and only 2 in each one. So now,
You're going to hold. You're going to hold your point because we're going to a break into our final 15 minutes of the show. You're listening to Westchester Eye on the radio. Our in-studio guest is Fred Polvere, and I am Ardina Stewart and John Sharan. We'll come back to the final 15 minutes, folks.
Soapbox, 1460 WVOX.
1460 WVOX.
Let's return now to Westchester Eye on the Radio with Peter Moses, John Sharan, and Ardina Seward on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Westchester Eye on the Radio. This week's edition of issues relating to Westchester and the surrounding area. And this week, Ardina and I are speaking with Fred Polvere, who is a political columnist, a writer, and a pundit about various issues relating out there. And Fred, you were telling us a little bit about the...
we have Paul on the line, right?
Yeah, well, I know we do, but let's let Fred finish his point from before. You were telling us a little bit about the eccentricities about fusion voting.
Right, and so in the case I gave you, we had Richard Blaine having 4 party lines and Ilse Lund having 3 party lines. Richard Blaine wins, but over the course of his term, the demographics in his district change, and it becomes more democratic. So the Independence Party, seeing that Ilse Lund is going to win, shifts their endorsement in the next election to Ilse Lund and not to Richard Blaine. This is not right. And this is what I'm saying about so many of these people. They have no vision. All they want is power, and they want patronage, or they want whatever, but it's not about an actual movement.
And you get bonus points for bringing in the characters of Casablanca.
Just looking at you.
Yes. Here's looking at you, kid. And here's looking at Ephraim Gonzalez Jr., who's on the line. Ephraim, I know you've been listening and you have something to say. So speak. Let's hear from you.
What I wanted to say, Ardina, was that the way that people did politics back in the day, that's never going to happen again. Not today with all of these new... There's just so much coming in now. And the Working Families Party does the same thing that the Independence Party does. They want that power, too. And they'll start flipping and switching. I don't think that people who have been around can understand this new system because it's very difficult. And it is, look, there's so much behind Hollywood with the independence movement and whatever, and then you've got the Cynthia Nixons or whatever. The one thing that I will tell you that did look very good was the way that they're fighting for the against the IBC. But, that still remains to be seen of how successful that would be. But unless candidates can have ground troops that give them the support where they need to go get the votes, you're going to see money, and you're going to see a lot of people give up. You're going to see a lot of people be deflated. In terms of the Republican Party, a lot of people don't want to admit this, but there were a lot of independent voters that voted for Donald Trump. And it tells you something. Maybe that was because of the way they were treated by the DNC, because after Bernie Sanders conceded and he didn't get the nomination, there really wasn't a reaching out from Hillary. One of the most arrogant people you'll ever meet is a person that doesn't like to include others into the mix. And that's what happened with the DNC. And I hate to say it, but that's what happened.
Let's let Fred discuss.
How about your response, Fred?
Yeah,
okay, Ephraim, is that your name?
Ephraim Gonzalez.
Yes.
Okay, so I agree with you about the minor parties. I don't believe there should be any fusion tickets across endorsements. But I disagree with you about the Working Families that endorses almost always Democratic candidates, and Conservative Party, which endorses Republican candidates. This is from the New York Times on August 2nd. There was a big article about the Independence Party, and where they're endorsing Cuomo. And it remains to be seen whether he's going to accept that endorsement. But they want to endorse him. Let me finish. But they're also endorsing Chris Collins, John Faso. They're completely opposed in their viewpoints. And that's what they do. And that's the difference between the Independence Party and the other party. So the New York State Independence Party said, this is a quote, they select not from the party labels, but from the quality of the candidate. What does that say to you? I know what it says to me. They try to pick winners. They don't care what the person stands for. But to agree with you, like I said before, I don't believe in fusion voting. There should be real third-party candidates who are different. We should get Louis Renault running for assembly person.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll tell you another thing. If a third-party candidate, if a third party can really get out and canvass and get out that vote, and they can be a powerful force, then I could see some type of scheme behind a candidacy for that. Unfortunately, it's either to block someone else or it's either to interrogate. Yeah, so it's done for facetious reasons most of the time. A lot of times you got good-hearted people that want to be a candidate for a party, and we just don't give them that play. We don't give them that respect. I feel bad about that, but I think that and I have to tell you that Joe Pinion is probably the type of Republican that Yonkers does need, and the Republican Party. We got to stop thinking about that how they have to be one way or we have to be against the Democrat. I just like a guy that just speaks about the views, and he's just talking about where it is. And some people, they may not like that. I know that the Democratic Party in Cuomo, they're kind of like fearful about hearing some of those ideas. And also Cuomo is running scared because he has to win big. Because if he doesn't win big, then he looks weak if he wants to run for president. So this is one of the most fascinating gubernatorial Senate primaries that we've seen in a long time, and it has the overtones to what's going to happen in the future. So
Ephraim,
I wish everyone a great day. And
we're going to have to hold it there, Ephraim. I thank you for calling in. Fred, let's finish up with politics here, and maybe we can squeeze in a little bit at the end on something else. Tell us about your views as to what needs to be fixed in Yonkers in your elevator speech.
Well, I think it's more than Yonkers. What Ephraim alluded to about somebody running, New York State is one of the hardest states to get on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
New York State, Nick Azimo's petitions, some of them he had people who signed for him and for Sayegh. And so what happens is if you've signed two petitions for the same person, that signature gets thrown out. New York State has no absentee voting. We have no voting by mail. In fact, in the last election with Shelley Mayer and help me here, I'm drawing a blank.
It was Shelley Mayer and Julie Killian.
Right. Julie Killian was questioned about changing voting rules in New York, and she said, we don't need early voting because we have absentee voting. Well, if you want to vote absentee in New York, you have to certify that you will not be in the state or in your election district on that day. So we don't have that, and that's not covered much. New York, it's not just Yonkers. We need to make getting on the ballot easier and voting easier. And now I'm going to say something that applies not only to Yonkers, not only to Westchester, not to this country, but globally. And whistleblowers released the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. And what we saw is that throughout the world, leaders were hiding money.
Mm-hmm.
We had a presidential candidate who had a Swiss bank account. And it's accepted. We accept it in this country. So we had these people. In the Paradise Papers, they named Wilbur Ross, Sheldon Adelson, Steve Wynn, Robert Mercer, Paul Singer, and so on. All Republican donors. Robert Mercer is running a Reclaim New York that we're paying too much taxes. Meanwhile, he's paying too little taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a very pessimistic view about what's going on everywhere, because the little people are doing what Leona Helmsley said. We're paying taxes, and the mega millionaires and the billionaires are not. And as long as this happens, we are going to be squeezed.
And how are we going to get candidates in there who are going to change that?
It's hard because, again, in New York, they make voting hard, but it's also because our lives are hard. Think about it. I mean, think about when you sign a contract for your phone. Did you know that you're signing away your right to sue them if they overcharge you? And you can't sue them yourself for $250 because the lawyer costs more than that. But you signed an agreement that you're going to mediation. So I don't know if there's ever going to be a strong enough grassroots campaign to change this.
And you're going to have to consider that to be our last word this week, because we've run out of time. You've been listening to Westchester Eye on the Radio here on WVOX 1460 AM and heard worldwide at WVOX.com. I'm John Charan along with our Dina Seward, and we thank today's special guest, Fred Polvere, a political columnist, certainly an individual who has a lot of opinions and a lot of thought-out ideas. Next week, we expect to have Peter Harcum, the Democratic candidate for the 40th State Senate District here in New York, and our co-host Peter Moses will be back. And until then, I hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you then.